Learning outcomes. After studying this module, you shall be able to know about definition of cyber forensics, cyber forensic investigation processes, and why cyber forensic analyst is required. Introduction. Although technology in general and computers specifically, since their introduction and dissemination into mainstream society have benefited society, there is also a dark side to this technology when abused. In current years, society has seen the rise in abuse of various kinds of personal or private and corporate conducted with, through or by technology. The existence of data in electronic form is representative of one's activities while working, living and playing in virtual environment. It creates electronic footprints and an electronic track of our daily lives and activities. The necessity and ability to identify, capture, recreate, display and store these electronic footprints enable those professionals charged with protecting personal, corporate and governmental security and safety to carry out their assigned responsibilities and to chase those individuals, organizations and nation states who utilize the dark side of technology to employ in illegal activities. As computers become more advanced, so do criminal activities. Therefore, the computer forensic function is in constant progression along with the technological advancement of computers. Computers are used in a variety of roles in the commencement of crime. Each of these roles differs in investigate and prosecutional issues because of the unique attributes of computers and the electronic advances they hold. Today, the need for organizations to implement a vigilant cyber forensic program with appropriate personal training, engagement policies and applicable procedures is critical. Now, next is defining cyber forensics. The world of cyber forensic investigation is relatively new and evolving, and as such, long-term standards, protocols, definitions, policies and procedures are emerging as well. They are being defined and redefined. Therefore, agreeing upon a single name for the process has not been globally standardized. Cyber forensic is the science of locating, extracting and analyzing types of data from different devices, which specialists then interpret to serve as legal evidence. E-discovery is the preservation, processing, review and production of computer evidence in reaction to civil litigation discovery requirements. Computer forensics is the discipline that combines elements of law and computer science to collect and analyze data from computer systems, network, wireless communications and storage devices in a way that is admissible as evidence in the court of law. It can also be referred as the science of location, extracting, analyzing and protecting types of data from different devices, which the specialists then interpret to serve as legal evidence. Now, next is cyber forensic investigation process. In general, the process of cyber forensic investigation consists of policies and procedures vary slightly among organizations. The following steps are: first is identification, documentation; second, collection or extraction, documentation; third, preservation, documentation; fourth, interpretation or analysis, documentation; and the fifth is communication. The protection of reliability of the electronic evidence collected is strongly coupled to ensure that there is in place a solid documentation process. The documentation process should be designed to authenticate and substantiate each step taken to identify, collect, extract, preserve and interpret or analyze the electronic evidence, as well as each individual who may have in any way interacted with or handled the electronic evidence. Identification requires the investigator along with the organizational management or potentially external assistance, example witness, law enforcement professionals, etc., to make a determination as to exactly what might be a source of evidence, electronic or manual, which means personal digital assistants, PDAs, pagers, files, laptops, hard drives, storage area networks, SANs, etc. The physical housing containing the technology is not electronic evidence, although the physical housing may provide additional evidence of a non-electronic type, example fingerprints, serial numbers, etc. The housing is merely container for the electronic evidence which resides stored on drives or in files. The cyber forensic investigator must determine and identify what and where the electronic evidence is to be collected. Collection or extraction is the process of physically gathering the electronic evidence which will eventually be copied several times, typically making 3 forensic copies, using special softwares and hardwares along with backup methods designed to document and preserve the original data. These copying and backup processes allow the investigator to work on and examine an identical forensic sound yet duplicate copy of the original electronic evidence data. This is the preservation step of the cyber forensic process. Preservation is performed so that first, the electronic evidence collected will be preserved in its original unaltered form. Second, the cyber forensic investigator can examine the electronic evidence utilizing special analysis tools without fear of damaging, destroying, or altering the original electronic evidence source. And third, in the unlikely event that a copy of the electronic evidence is unusable or damaged in some manner, the cyber forensic investigator can resort to making another copy from a still existing, untouched backup copy. The originally collected electronic evidence, once duplicated, is sealed and securely locked up. Finding electronic evidence is fairly easy, making sense out of what is found and determining its integrity, feasibility, usefulness to provide an opinion on the relevance of the electronic evidence to the case at hand, however, is another matter. Interpretation or analysis results of the cyber forensic examination requires good cyber forensics training and many years of experience to correctly interpret the findings. The implication of incorrectly interpreting the examined electronic evidence or in finding or identify evidence altogether could very well mean significantly financial loss and legal liabilities for an organization as well as professional liability for the cyber forensic investigator. Communicating the findings of a cyber forensic investigation may be well directed by circumstances. Was the investigation initiated by a private or internal corporate request, example internal audits, is a result of law enforcement warrant, is in response to a legal action taken against a current or former employee or contractor or third party, depending on who initiated the investigation or the circumstances leading to the cyber forensic investigation. Communicating the results may require the cyber forensic investigator to appear in court or before the corporate board of directors. Regardless of the final setting, the investigator's final report should be considered proprietary, confidential, and disclosed to only those individuals with the appropriate need to know clearance and authorizations. The detailed content and design of the final report may vary among organizations and departments. In general, however, the report should provide a clear timeline and substantial documentation of the steps, actions, findings, and conclusions of cyber forensic investigator. It is very important that the investigator makes adequate copies of this final report, retaining, however, distributing control of all copies. Now, illegal activities warranting cyber forensic investigation. Each of the following potential exposure depending on the impact on internal control structures and relevance to organizational information technology IT systems would possible warrant an organization mobilizing and initiating a forensic investigation. The first is forensic audits, next identity thefts, next hacking, next embezzlement, next instances of homicide, next drug and embezzlements, record keeping, next child pornography, next compromised customer private data stored electronically, next peer-to-peer file sharing, next leak or unauthorized disclosure of internal and confidential information, next theft of trade secrets, intellectual property, unlawful access to company computers, next use of company computers or technology for personal gain, running auction sites, shopping, eBay, fantasy sport leagues, etc. Next, violation of company acceptable use policies for downloading music and movies, accessing adult websites, etc. Next, launching denial of service attacks against a competitor. Many organizations are placing enterprise computer forensic in their core security and control processes, including the detection and investigation of intellectual property theft. Now, the evidence. Evidence in its pure form is information presented in testimony or in documents that is used to convince the fact finder to decide the case for one side or the other. Electronic evidence is information and data of investigative value that is stored on or transmitted by electronic device. Such evidence is acquired when data or physical items are collected and stored for examination purposes. Electronic evidence is often latent in the same sense as fingerprints or DNA evidence. Electronic evidences. It can be transcend borders with ease and speed, is fragile and can be easily altered, damaged or destroyed, is sometimes time sensitive. Evidence might have a margin of error associated with it and the output must always be verified. A first responding officer means auditor, law enforcement professional, human resource director, etc. may be responsible for the recognition, collection, preservation, transportation or storage of electronic evidence. Thus, knowledge of even the elementary rules governing the collection, preservation and safeguarding of evidence is critical. A greater in-depth knowledge of the rules of evidence is highly recommended for any professional engaged or in considering cyber forensic investigations. Handling electronic evidence normally consists of the following steps. First is recognition and identification of the evidence. Next is the documentation of the site of evidence collection. Next, collection and preservation of the evidence. Next is packaging and transportation of the evidence. The courts may closely scrutinize actions that have the potential to alter, damage or destroy original evidence. Within the legal system, such uncontrolled destruction of potential evidence is referred to as spoliation. Spoliation can be defined as the destruction or material alteration of evidence or the failure to preserve property for another's use as evidence in pending or reasonably foreseeably litigation. Essentially, Locard's principle is applied to crime scenes in which the perpetrators of a crime comes into contact with the scene, so he will both bring something into the scene and leave with something from the scene. Every contact leaves a trace. Cyber forensic investigations are no different. Managers have the responsibility of ensuring that the personnel under their direction are adequately trained and equipped to properly handle and protect any electronic evidence which may have been obtained as a part of cyber forensic investigation to preserve the environment from which the electronic evidence was collected. Ultimately, rules of evidence must be established and maintained, and chain of custody must be preserved for all evidence that may be potentially or eventually used in court. This chain, in part, ensures the integrity of the evidence. The professional and competent practice of cyber forensics, undertaken with full knowledge of existing associated laws pertaining to identification, collection, preservation, custody, and transportation of electronic evidence, is critical to organizations competing and operating in the 21st century. Next, why employ cyber forensic analysis? Within the past several years, there have been a flood of legislative action at the state and central level, which has made the need to have a forensically sound assessment process of organizational information technologies in place and verifiable. There is no operation in today's 21st century organization that is not touched in some way, in some manner by technology. The legislative requirement to attest the accuracy, the integrity and the validity of those data that comprise the organization's published financial statements, which investigators may rely upon, demand that an organization have the ability to assess and, where appropriate and necessary, identify and prevent manipulation of those data, which by failing to do so may lead to financial fraud. As organizations move further into the 21st century, increasingly dependent upon technology with no alternative plan possible, the single most important asset held by any global organization may no longer be the euros, dollars, dirhams or yen held in a corporate treasure account, but the electronic bits and bytes, when logically put together, represent the lifeblood of the organization. The ability to identify potential or actual misuse of these data will drive the need for organization to implement and sustain cyber forensically sound internal control strategies, policies and procedures. A cry from those affected by the ease and ability by which such critical data may be manipulated or misused has already been heard, and global legislation has already begun the process of holding corporate executives accountable. The ability to provide culpability beyond the corporate boardroom in case involving the theft of, the misuse of corporate assets will become the greatest challenge of those professionals charged with the protecting their assets. Example, internal, external auditors, information security professionals, etc. There are many compliance and governance issues now that involve an organization's electronic record archives that stem from relatively new legislation that an organization may not be aware of, yet possess potential liabilities if not properly addressed. Such issues are information system internal control assessment and auditing. Next, risk management. Next, lawsuit investigations. Next, performance management. Next, investigations and management reporting. Next, data retention policies, archiving and storing. Now, this summary. Cyber forensic is the science of locating, extracting and analyzing types of data from different devices, which specialists then interpret to serve as legal evidence. Computer forensic is the discipline that combines elements of law and computer science to collect and analyze data from computer systems, networks, wireless communications and storage devices in a way that is admissible as evidence in a court of law. The process of cyber forensic investigation consists of identification, collection or extraction, preservation, interpretation or analysis and communication. Activities such as fraud audits, identity theft, hacking, instances of homicide, drug and embezzlement, record keeping, child pornography, etc. would possibly warrant an organization mobilizing and initiating a forensic investigation. Electronic evidence is often latent in the same sense as fingerprint or DNA evidence. Since electronic evidence can transcend border with ease and speed, is fragile and can be easily altered, damaged or destroyed, and is sometimes time sensitive. Handling electronic evidence normally consists of recognition and identification of the evidence, documentation of the site of evidence collection, collection and preservation of the evidence, and packaging and transportation of the evidence. There are many compliance and governance issues in an organization. Electronic record archives that may involve new legislation that an organization may not be aware of, yet possess potential liabilities if not properly addressed. Thank you.